Cool. Inney, I'll let you start with some Maysles stuff.
My name's Inney Prakash, and I'm one of the cinema programmers at Maysles Documentary Center, which is a nonprofit education center and 51-seat cinema in Harlem, New York, that was founded by the filmmaker Albert Maysles. We're super honored to be hosting today's panel with the George Jackson Brigade as part of our series Abolition Now, 50 Years of the Attica Prison Uprising. And I'm super honored to be able to hand it over to my colleague, Emily Apter, who curated that series.
Thanks, Inney. Yeah, this series is something we've been working on for almost the last year in anticipation of the 50th anniversary of the Attica Uprising massacre, as well as the 50th anniversary of the murder of George Jackson at San Quentin in 1971. This series is a collaboration with Third World Newsreel, the alternative media production company and distributor, whose their first film that they made as the organization that exists today was about the Attica Uprising, which is called Teach Our Children. It's also been a collaborative effort with the Freedom Archives in the Bay Area, who have very generously given us a lot of material for research, as well as films in the series and one audio album. We also are partnering with the Documentary Forum at City College, as well as the Attica Is All of Us coalition. So before I say a little bit more about the series itself, I just want to start with a quote from George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, which I think did a lot to help frame the series, and I think will sort of echo through the politics and experiences of the George Jackson Brigade, which we'll get into in a bit. But the quote is, "Revolution is an imperative, a love-inspired, conscious act of desperation. It's aggressive. It isn't cool or cautious. It's bold, audacious, violent, an expression of icy, disdainful hatred. It can hardly be any other way without raising a fundamental contradiction." So that's from George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, which is the last book that he wrote before his murder in 1971. And we had a really great conversation with Alex and several of the other filmmakers in the series last night about the films in the series and the occasion of the anniversary of Attica. And one thing I took away, which I just want to share, is that I think we really fleshed out, part of the purpose of the series is to commemorate, which I think is, as we discussed, an act of both celebration and mourning. And that feels like a really great place to land in terms of how we're thinking about the past and how we're thinking about our organizing moving forward. So I'm just going to read the same passage that I read last night about sort of how we see the role of this series and our role as abolitionists and organizers and filmmakers and media makers. So our hope is to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Attica Uprising and to reflect on ongoing resistance efforts against prison slavery and police terror. It's to memorialize the political prisoners killed by guards and troopers in 1971 and to grieve the many others killed in the struggle for their and others' liberation in the present day. It's to activate film in the fight for a world beyond policing and
You still there?
We lost you.
Yeah, lost you froze. Check your computer.
I think Emily might just have a weak connection. I'm sure we'll get her back in a second.
Oh,
we lost you, Emily.
Lost you for a moment there, Emily. Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh,
There she is.
Your image is frozen though. So
Okay,
oh no,
weird.
it's back.
no, now you're back. Now you're back.
It's
Yeah,
back?
you're back.
Okay.
Hey, Emily, can I just interrupt because we're gonna have to interrupt this anyway? So if you're doing the bio, just for me, just just shorten it way up. I feel like you read a really long bio last night. Did she freeze again? Oh no. Sorry, it was a thing I forgot to tell her before we started. You all are still here, right?
Yeah, her
Yes.
picture.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll let her try to get through it, and then we'll do the conversation. She might be resetting. Janine, what's your background picture from?
That's from a 144-mile march that ADAPT, people with disabilities, did from Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C.
Wow, what is that, a recent one?
To
Or?
commemorate all the deaths in another kind of institution that should be abolished, which is psych hospitals and nursing homes.
Sorry, I'm assuming she's just resetting her internet.
Well, maybe we should go ahead with
Yes.
the conversation.
I think, yeah, we'll just go ahead and hand it off to you, Alex, and we can complete the intro later if you want to go ahead and get things moving.
Sure, I can do that. Thanks to all. Well, thank you first to the Maysles Center for putting on this amazing event, this amazing series of events commemorating Attica. And I echo what Emily was saying about this idea we were discussing last night between both commemoration and mourning. And I'll add on, one of the things we were talking about was there's an old wobbly slogan, Joe Hill, don't mourn, organize. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot, but with an amendment to it, which is that mourning is natural and it's a part of the process. And so it shouldn't be don't mourn, organize. It should be mourn, organize. Anyways, I'm really so thrilled to have you all here virtually now. This is a little conversation we're going to do. We gave it a title, and Ed, we amended it upon your suggestion. So we're calling this discussion "Abolition and Anti-Capitalism in Action," a discussion about Attica with the George Jackson Brigade. So really honored to be able to have this discussion with you all. I thought instead of me sort of giving an intro to the brigade, it would be more sort of, well, maybe I'll say a very brief thing about who the brigade was, but it's really important to hear who the brigade was from the point of view of the brigade members themselves. So I thought I would say a quick piece about it just to give people a little bit of context, and then start kind of in by asking you about that. So the George Jackson Brigade formed sort of officially, I would say, right, Ed, in about 1975. It was an urban guerrilla group formed in the Northwest and in Seattle specifically, and over a period of about 2 years. Would you say that's about correct?
Formed?
No, it was formed, I'm saying, but then it was sort of operational for a period of about 2 years.
About 8 years, I think. Even after we were in prison, Janine and Sherman and both of those people were on the run, still bombing banks and doing things.
Wait, 8 years? Sorry, my math is all.
Let me see, 70 in the 80s, anyways. It ended in the 80s. I know that.
This is why I was trying to be very brief with my introduction of the brigade, because of course I was gonna immediately get corrected.
76 to 82 is my involvement.
Is what you okay? So urban guerrilla group based in the Northwest. Did a number of amazing actions, hopefully some of which we'll hear about today, inspired in part by the writings and the work of George Jackson. And as we'll discuss, there was a lot of connections with the Attica brothers, with the prisoners' rights and abolition movements going on the East Coast. And I think that's one of the things that interested us about having this conversation with you all. So I will then put a pin in it there. But I will say our guests today are Ed Mead, Mark Cook, and Janine Bertram, 3 members of the brigade. I don't like speaking of you in the past tense or the brigade in the past tense, because in my eyes, the brigade is still here, right? You all are still here. So let's just get right into it instead of all of my nonsense discussion here. And so, as I said, I thought we could start by kind of going a little chronologically through it, which is to say, asking each of you at the sort of time that you joined up or founded the brigade in Ed's case. So let's start with you, Ed. Can you tell me a little bit about how the brigade was started and kind of what you saw as its guiding mission or goal, especially kind of in founding the organization?
A lot of things cumulative happened. Attica was one of them. The death of George Jackson was another. the local struggles that were taking place in Seattle at the time, all led us, and the protests that we were doing, all led us to the conclusion that purely mass action by itself was not enough to help build the mass movement, that we needed a little bit more oomph, as it were, and came to the conclusion that this could be provided with arm by means of illegal actions. And we didn't just jump right into it. There were struggles going on in the Central District of Seattle, the Black community, led by the United Construction Workers, which was a Black construction organization. Construction workers made up of their own organization. And there was a lot of construction taking place in the Central District at that time. But there were white contractors with white construction workers. And the United Construction Workers were saying, hey, you know, we would like some of those jobs since you're doing the construction in our neighborhood, in our area. And the white contractors blew them off. And so we would have demonstrations. We would have militant demonstrations. We would put on masks and run into a construction site, destroy as much as we could, and run out again before. And, you know, some people were arrested doing that. At another point, it was decided that we would, a small group of us would firebomb the offices of one of the racist contractors. And the firebomb completely destroyed the office. And we listened to the community. You know, nobody knew who we were or what we did, but we had our ears out. And what was the reaction of the political community in Seattle towards this firebombing? And it was overwhelmingly positive. So that was something that got us moving and more in that direction. The trial was coming up for those who were arrested during the protests. And just before the trial, we went onto one of the construction sites. We put sand in the oil tanks. We put dirt in the fuel tanks. We drained some of the fuel tanks of the fuel and then lit it on fire, destroying the piece of equipment that was above it. And when the trial took place, the complaining witness, the contractor, said he won't testify. He doesn't want any more trouble. It's already cost him enough. And so he withdrew the charges, and all the charges were dismissed. And that was another indication that what we were doing was a step in the right direction. And then after that, just like is happening today, a lot of young people were being killed. Young Black men were being killed by police. And in one instance, it was a 15-year-old boy who was shot in the back and killed. And of course, it was totally justified as far as the police were concerned. And the kid was unarmed. And at about the same time, the Seattle City Council was having a hearing to determine whether or not the police could use dum-dum bullets, hollow point bullets, which are very similar to dum-dum bullets, which were outlawed, well, considered a war crime for their use because of the damage that they did. We protested hard against that, and the city council went ahead and passed it. And at that point, look, enough of marching in circles carrying signs. That's not going to get us anywhere. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it was long.
So, as I understand it, and I'll kick it over to Mark, it started organically. You didn't even have a name really, right, until you wrote your first communique and felt yourself sort of inspired by George Jackson. Maybe speak really quickly at it, and we'll go over to Mark about the moment when you sort of gave yourselves that name and why you decided to invoke George Jackson, as the brigade.
Okay. Prisoners at the Washington State Penitentiary at Walla Walla had something called self-government, 50-50, 50% of the power in the prisoners, 50% in the hands of the administration. It's a long story about how this came about and how it worked out. But needless to say, the prison administration and the guards were totally against prisoners having any control, any power whatsoever, and did everything they could to sabotage it. Finally, just outlawing the resident government council, and so the RGC, and so the prisoners did everything they could to try and turn this around, and finally said, look, if you don't, we're just struggling for democracy. If you don't let us have a little bit of this, we're going to take over the prison. And the administration just blew them off. And so they seized large sections of the prison. And this was concluded with some violence on the part of the administration against the prisoners. And the prisoners, the rebelling prisoners, were thrown in a segregation unit where they were being brutalized. And the type of brutality I'm talking about is typified by what they did to a prisoner named Carl Harp. They beat him with lead-lined gloves, and then they shoved a riot baton up his rectum, caused a 5/8 inch tear to his anterior blah blah something or other, caused him to be hospitalized. So these guys who are being brutalized in the hole sent message out to the world, help us. This is what's happening. This is what they're doing to us. And the message went to Portland, but wound up in Seattle. And I went around El Centro de la Raza and all these different groups, American Indians, AIM, trying to get support for what can we do to help these prisoners who are being brutalized? Nobody was willing to do anything. And so it was at that point that I thought it was necessary to, okay, well, this is, there's got to be a way to get this done. And so I moved out of where I was living and got a small rundown house in a neighborhood, rented a house in a working class neighborhood, Georgetown, and started gathering the materials for constructing a bomb, an explosive device. I wasn't there very long before only one person knew where I was, and that was my partner at the time. And she told Bruce Seidel where I was against my explicit instructions. And so Bruce came and said, hey, I can't let you do this alone. And so he and I together built the bomb and decided we were going to, well, we knew where we were going. We were going to break into the headquarters of the Department of Corrections in the state capital, Olympia, and place the bomb inside that building. And so when the bomb was complete, and it was a big one, it had like this big around. It was, so we put the bomb in the back of the truck, drove down to Olympia, since, you know, I had some experience with burglary, I took a crowbar and had the bomb in a backpack, went up to the 5th floor of the building, the Department of Corrections building, pried open the door, went in. I wanted to put it under the director's desk, but I couldn't find it. I didn't want to stay there all day looking for it. So I put it under the desk of the associate assistant director, left. We drove back to Seattle, back to the little house.
You want to get down?
And started working on a communique. And what are we going to call ourselves? Who are, what are we going to say we are? And the George Jackson Brigade had gone the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA, had gone way too far in their posturing of, field marshal this and that kind of thing. And we knew that they went too far, too fast. And we weren't going to make that mistake. But we did call ourselves the George Jackson Brigade. And that was because George Jackson said something to the effect that, hurl me into the next existence, do what you will. I'll crawl back from the grave. I'll haunt you. He's talking about, the state, the ruling class. I'll haunt you from the grave. Blah, blah, blah. And so we thought we would be a part of that haunting. We thought, we're gonna have, anyway. So that was the story. That's how we and.
Do you want to get down?
Also, Janine, you're.
It's telling you to mute yourself, Janine.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, George Jackson said that any serious organizing effort must carry with it from the very beginning the capability of exercising revolutionary violence. And we believe that, and we were not only believe that, we were implementing it.
Great. Let's hold it there. Mark, I mean, because the name of the George Jackson Brigade is in large part how I know you were in the orbit of Bo and Ed, but was how you ended up actually kind of becoming involved in a way. Would you tell the story about how you came to be involved with the George Jackson Brigade?
It started off with the Panthers. Okay, this is 2 prisoners, myself and Clement Blanchy, who became the captain of the prisoner organization, Walla Walla Prisoner Organization, and I became his lieutenant of information. We were pretty much focused on the right for prisoners to vote and the labor rights inside of prison, and these were the first 2 points of the Black Panther Party's platform. In focusing on the right to vote, I was able to join other prisoners, a small group of prisoners, to form a prisoner-run workshop within the prison. And in a poster, we had a volunteer from outside who knew the skills, who was training us. And as we moved along, it became the first prison organization to make a profit. This is run by prisoners. And this was just our experiment with it, And it was running so well that it finally evolved into what we call a family group, a small group of prisoners, isolated from other prisoners. And it evolved also into another group, which was the Bridge Project, which was outside of prison. Now, during all this time, I was working with the other prisoners. This happened in 1969. This was before Attica. I was influenced and joined with other prisoners who protested racist, action by white prisoners. It's a movie. It's just a movie being shown in the prison. It was the 100 rifles with James Brown, etc. White prisoners said, this is not going to be shown in our prison. And there was a thing where prisoners could choose, different clubs or different groups could choose which movie is going to be shown. Well, black prisoners chose 100 rifles, and the white prisoners says, no, not going to be shown. So black prisoners said, we're going to shut down the prison, and not go to work, because labor is the only real action that prisoners have to control the prison. It's hard for them to realize it. They only realize it in critical situations. And so anyways, we shut down, and just the black prisoners. But white prisoners says, hey, these guys are more stand-up than we are. We're going to join them because we're going to look like wimps. So all the prisons stood up and shut down for a long period of time, bringing up all their grievances, etc. Because I was considered part of the leadership, the con bosses, part of the leadership within the prison, I was joined to go represent the prisoners who were locked down and express the grievances, various grievances within the prison before the warden. As a result of that, it was a long, drawn-out strike. Like it started in 1969 and went to 1970. But the leaders in the Department of Corrections in the Capitol said, listen to the grievances and resolve them, and don't come back to us until you have something resolved. Well, one of the things was that we were to file a document saying what our grievances was and how the changes would be in the prison. Well, I became part of a group that was appointed by prisoners to write this document expressing what we wanted. So we wrote this document called the Constitution, and it was asking for the moon, more than anybody could ever get. And the administration just shut it down. They said, no, you're not going to get any of that at all. So write it again. So we wrote another one, which made it so the prison had not only the same powers they did before, but more powers to correct prisoners. And then we wrote a newsletter in our bomb saying, don't follow those guys who wrote your Constitution. And we're the ones who wrote it. Don't follow those guys. They're selling you out. Take your constitutions before the mess hall and burn them in the pile. And so when they let us out to go to the mess hall, everybody brought the constitutions and they were burned in front of the mess hall. And so we're sent back to do another constitution. And this one, we call it the Resident Governmental Council. And well, there's other reasons, but anyways, it was pretty well accepted by the administration. In Olympia, they said, okay, go ahead and let them run this thing. And if it fails, it's just on them where you take your prison back. And so that ran for, I don't know how many years. While it was running, it gave prisoners 50-50 control of the prison. The prisoners controlled the entertainment and the treatment programs. And the associate warden and the warden controlled all the security and that kind of stuff. Well, because we had this control, we were able to do other programs within in the institution. Now, one of them was an underground newspaper, which is probably one of the most important things we did. They always had a prisoner newsletter that went out, but it was controlled by the administration. But this was the first one that was totally controlled by prisoners, and it was underground, and we didn't let anybody know who was doing this. Everybody in the prison was on the same page, we had the same grievances, and that's what we wrote about, what the grievances were and how they could be overcome if given a chance.
Well, so Mark, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but just to kind of keep us on task a little bit. So this is a lot of organizing you're doing 69 through 71. Okay. I know you've talked about, using the threat of Attica, but then when you got out, and what year did you get out? 72, around there?
Got out somewhere around in 1971, 72.
So can you talk a little bit about the way you've talked to me about is you got a call and said there's this group calling themselves the George Jackson Brigade. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Before that, like I was a Panther. Before that, I was a Panther. So when I got to Seattle in a halfway house, I went to look for the Panthers, and they were not in Seattle. They were in Oakland. And so I was going to stay active. And so I did an organizing thing where I called a Convention 72. It was a forum held once a year, and I was able to go about and find all these people in various organizations who supported the prisoner movement and brought them together, okay? And that's where I met Janine and Ed and Therese and Bo. These are people of the brigade before they were in the brigade. And that's what the first connection was. And so I continued to do my work, and while I was doing it, that's when the brigade came to me. They weren't the brigade at the time, but they came to me and asked, told them what they were doing, and asked me to help them with some of their funding. Okay, I did that. And they came back again the next time, and I wanted to find out what was going on. In fact, the Panthers in Oakland heard about them, and they want to know who they were and what they were doing. And one of the jobs of a chapter is to report weekly to the Central Committee, and this was from all over the United States. And they were to determine what was correct and was not correct. And they told us they were interested in this because George Jackson was considered a field marshal of the Black Panther Party, even though he was in prison. And two of the members of the associates of the George Jackson Brigade came to me and asked me if I would meet with them, and they wanted to show and tell me what they were doing. Okay, so we met with them. People in Oakland said they liked what the brigade was doing, and to stay involved with them as much as I could and find out what they were all totally up to. Well, I got a little bit too involved. I lost connection with the Oakland headquarters, because the captain of the prison Black Panthers hanged himself, or was supposedly hanged, was found hanged in his cell. And so my connection was broken right there from what was happening in Walla Walla. So I just kind of rode with the brigade for a while, and they showed me what they were doing. And this was after, I believe after Attica, that they took on the responsibility of demonstrating and giving support to prisoners.
So Janine, do you maybe want to jump in here? I don't know if you're there, but as sort of then you being the next generation of brigade members that were recruited in, right, by Bo and by, you knew Mark as well, and maybe you could elaborate on Mark. You mentioned convention, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes, I met Mark and several political prisoners at convention. And it was impressive because they were actually dealing with prisoners, and nobody was dealing with prisoners, and nobody was dealing with race. And at that point, I had come out of the lesbian feminist movement, and it was all a bunch of university white women. And I thought, this is not the kind of revolution that I'm interested in. And so I had started organizing prostitutes union, or working for the decriminalization of prostitutes. And that's when I met, I already knew Bo and Therese just from the Seattle women's community. And I met Mark through them, and got into the brigade through Rita and Therese. And I didn't meet John until they got him out of prison, and were able to. And they were on the run. The brigade was on the run and underground, and Mark and Ed were in prison, and so they definitely needed support. And they were still one of the few groups dealing with prisoners and people of color, and they weren't totally all dogma. It wasn't just the study of Marxist-Leninism or anarchism or anything. And they were actually active in doing something towards revolution. And so that was what I wanted to be involved with. And plus, my politics have a huge influence from both George Jackson, when I read Blood in My Eye and Soledad Brother, and also through prisons and people of color and people with no funds and no power. So I felt like revolution needed to be action. And that's why I got involved with the brigade.
Perfect. You started to allude to it a little bit, but we were talking the other day about, specifically, so we talked George Jackson, but also Attica itself, the kind of maybe impact or effect it had on either your personal political formation or the formation or you joining the brigade. I was wondering if you all would want to say a couple of words about, specifically Attica happening in '71 and being a kind of paradigm shift or an apex event in your political formation. Any of you want to jump in on that?
Well, it happened while I was in prison, so I saw, able to see it on TV, et cetera. And also we had communication from the Black Panther Party, and they were at Attica representing the Attica prisoners at that time. So it was just part of my job, I guess.
Did it feel like a kind of moment of, we can do this, or we should be doing this, or?
I felt we started and we did do something, and they figured out they could also do something. It's not a one-upsmanship, anything like that, but it was something we stayed aware of riots in prisons around the United States, and the ones we were in constantly. What was going on as long as you were in prisons. It never stopped, and that was just one of the exceptional episodes.
Ed, do you have a thought about how Attica maybe impacted you, or if it impacted you, in what ways?
Like Mark, I was in prison. I was at the United States Penitentiary at McNeil Island in Washington State when Attica took place. And at that time, I was a budding revolutionary. And I got out of prison as a result of a court order a year later, and became active in Seattle's political community. And a part of that was the National Lawyers Guild. I was a jailhouse lawyer, and I became a part of the National Lawyers Guild. And what we did is we would bring former Attica prisoners to Seattle and show the recently released Attica movie, like at the University of Washington, different places to raise money.
Yeah, all right.
Well, so sorry, I don't mean, but maybe this is a moment to transition into that question, which is that you knew John Hill, whose Mohawk name was Splitting the Sky, or Sacagawea. You knew Frank Big Black Smith a little bit, both Ed, you and Mark. So maybe you could transition into talking a little bit about those relationships, those encounters.
Well, in the early years, Big Black came to Seattle. He did stay with me. They gave him, people seem to say, figure I was a place to go. So I gave him my apartment. I moved out, and he stayed there. This is. I don't know if I can get the picture. This is Big Black. No, you can't see it. Can't see it. Anyways, that was one of his pictures we took with him here in Seattle. Sacagawea, that's John Hill. I met him during a forum at was it Evergreen College in Olympia. He was selling his books, and he had some kind of a flat tire, a breakdown. And so I bought enough of his books so he get his tire fixed. So it's just later on, but that's just a loose contact I had with him. I had long discussions with Big Black about Attica and Walla Walla, back and forth. But with John Hill, we didn't have that much of a discussion. He was just trying to sell his books up there at the college. Okay.
Ed, what about you?
Well, through the National Lawyers Guild, I brought both Big Black and John to Seattle, and we put on fundraising events, speaking events for them, and raised some pretty good money. But what I was most proud of is I was able to take each of them on different occasions into the prison at Monroe and screen the Attica film, and then prisoners could ask questions. And at this time, we were doing the Washington State Prisoners Labor Union. and we had easy access to the Monroe prison. And I felt good about getting them in. Then later on in 1974, there was going to be a national demonstration over Attica. And the NLG flew me to a one-way ticket. I don't know if they were trying to say something or not, to Buffalo, where I worked with the Attica Brothers Legal Defense Fund. And then we had this big national demonstration. And afterwards, I hitchhiked home. Anyway, and I've been in touch with, John Hill until, right up till time just before he died. He would come to, when he'd come in Seattle or in San Francisco where I was living, and stay at my place while he did speaking gigs. And he and I did speaking gigs together up and down the West Coast.
So yeah, I mean, I think I just wanted to elaborate that because I think it's important to understand the national context, right? Attica didn't happen in a vacuum. You all were in touch with these people, you were talking to them, you were probably discussing strategy, that this was all in the mix, overlapping together, and I think sometimes across the coast, people don't think about that connective tissue. I think it's important, to articulate it. Just to shift focus a little bit. So there's, the brigade, I would say, and I think this is sort of true, in some ways was known for many amazing things, but in terms of, was your capacity to communicate most articulately through your communiques, which are amazing documents. They are collected in this book, Creating a Movement with Teeth, which I recommend. This sort of collects all the primary documents, writings about the brigade, mainstream, coverage, underground news coverage, but it also reprints the brigade, their political statement. Now, Janine, there was a communique issued, I think it was International Women's Day, 1976. It included a poem you wrote, I think maybe in collaboration with Bo, but it concluded with a line, no, that was a solo effort. Yes, that you just wrote that poem.
Are you talking about the cozy, cuddly, armed and dangerous?
That's
yes, you liked that one.
Well, everybody likes that one, Janine.
Yeah, I think, that was part of it, the way we related to each other. I also think I want to just go back for a moment to Attica, that an important part of that was realizing that Black prisoners, any prisoners, but definitely Black prisoners, were expendable completely, and that you could have a death sentence at any time, no matter if you were there for 90 days, just because they'll murder you. And I think that's something people don't focus on. And that was an important part. I mean, Attica was a lot of assassinations.
Yeah, I mean, I think explicitly, right? They knew who they were targeting when they retook the prison. It wasn't coincidence that many of the leaders of the uprising were the ones who were dead in the dirt after, right? Who'd been murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the most politically advanced too, like Sam Melville, were killed.
Yeah. L.D. Barkley.
He was, those that were most politically active were also targeted.
So yeah, I appreciate you adding that in, Janine. I'm not a professional at this, so I'm bad at segues, but I thought we could go back to that communique, which I think is a great one. Do you want to say the line instead of me saying it? Janine?
What are you talking about? We are cozy, cuddly, armed and dangerous, and we will raise the fucking prisons to the ground.
That's the line. That's
Uh-huh.
the line I'm referring to. I mean, I think a sort of better abolitionist cry I have not heard in my life. But I think what I love about it and the way the communiques you drafted was that it situates love and joy alongside the need for armed insurrection, right? It's playful and it's deadly serious all at once. And so I had a question for you specifically, Janine, about that interplay, of love and struggle in revolutionary, anti-capitalist, abolitionist work. And it's one of the things that has filled my heart over the past couple of years I've gotten to know you, is how beautifully you embody that. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that space for love, joy, playfulness alongside deadly serious revolutionary action.
Well, I think that's important to human beings, and it's humans that have to be revolutionary, but also you have to have, in order to be a committed revolutionary, you have to have a complete love of the people. And I think and the playfulness, I don't know, I think that just depends on who's comprising the group, but you have to love, and certainly George Jackson referred to that, and Che Guevara referred to that, and I think it's absolutely true that a true revolutionary is guided by feelings of love, and that's the primary focus.
Beautiful. And I'll just, for the people who might be watching this, the political statement that you all went on to draft was entitled, which I think is also beautiful, "The power of the people is the force of life," right?
Which was a quote from the Red Star Singers.
So maybe we're about out of time. I think I thought I'd sort of ask end by asking each of you, and I don't know if maybe Emily and Inney might have some follow-up. But just kind of, if you have any words of advice, guidance. I know we've been talking a lot about the next generation of activists who are or will be engaged in revolutionary struggle, who are perhaps inspired by the legacy of the Attica brothers and by the work of the George Jackson Brigade. I was wondering if you just each of you have a kind of a takeaway, what you would like them to sort of know or think about, that sort of drawing on your own experiences.
Well, all of us were involved with a general persuasion to start with. We carried the signs, and we marched in circles and did what we had to do. So I'm not taking anything away from people who still do it. It's a beginning, but it's not the end. And I've been struggling along with my people ever since we came to America as slaves, and later on through all the Jim Crow stuff, etc. It's been a continuing struggle, and it hasn't ended yet. And sometimes you got to get a little rough, and that's what Brigade was about. It was not to harm people, but to attract attention to what is going on in the United States. And it's serious, and something has to be done. There's a crisis time then. It's a crisis time now, probably worse now for everybody than it was just for the Native Americans and the Blacks back in the old days.
I think that's true. And Mark, one thing that you always say is you can't change a law without breaking a law.
That's right. Believe it or not. Yeah, Martin Luther King, he broke the law. People don't understand that. But in order to change it in any kind of way, he had to break the law, step by step, chipping away at these people. Okay. Thank you for having us.
You're not quite off the hook yet, Mark, almost. But Janine, did you want to add something more to that?
Yeah, I think that what's important for any generation involved in, particularly in armed struggle, is to communicate with people about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that was why our communiques were important. The poem that you talk about, not only did I write the line to close it out, but also I talked about how we were a mix of race and politics, and we came together because it's critical. I mean, they are murdering people. The state is murdering people, and they are now murdering people, and plus all of the other forms of oppression that take place in day-to-day lives of anybody that is not part of the 3%. And it's critical to resist that. And you can do it people used to tell me, well, you don't have to build a bomb. You can take super glue and start by gluing doors shut of businesses and, doing minor damage. and see
Paying
what
that
that's like to
attention.
you and see what kind of reaction people have to that. And there are certainly, and I also don't want to take anything away from carrying signs and marching. I think that's important resistance as well. But you have to communicate with the mass movement. And that's one thing the brigade did. And I think that was critical.
Wonderful. Ed, do you have any final sort of thoughts?
Well, we did what we did based on our analysis of reality at the time that we engaged in those actions. And there's no way that we can understand the reality that's going to be faced by those who come after us. And the stuff that Mark and Janine have said is very true. We misjudged the political realities. There were revolutions taking place all across the globe: Ethiopia, Angola, Mozambique, Nicaragua, El Salvador. The US had just been kicked out, of gotten its ass kicked in Vietnam. It seemed to us like the forces of progress were on the march, and that it was important for us to heed Che Guevara's call of 1, 2, 3, many Vietnams, and to open a front here inside the belly of the beast. Revolution requires sacrifice. And, you know, I don't, in looking at today's movement, just, you can't even call it that. There's nobody like the people that refuse to wear a mask. They're not willing to give up anything. And it's pretty much the same with the left. They're not willing to take any kind of significant risk in order to bring about change. And change is not going to come. It's not going to fall from the sky, ready-made. It's got to be built. It's got to be organized, and it's got, anyway, I'm just babbling. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ed. Inney and or Emily, do you have anything you'd like to sort of ask, or any clarifying questions, or just curiosity questions, et cetera, before we call it?
Sorry, I'm on my phone now because I was having some connection issues, but I mean, mostly I just want to say thank you to all of you guys for participating in this conversation. And I think I just wanted to, you know, echo the point you made, Alex, and your original words, Janine, of leaving space in revolutionary struggle for love and joy and pleasure and celebration, as well as like those sort of firm commitments to making those sacrifices, Ed, and taking up arms for struggle. And I also just wanted to add gratitude to Ed, which Alex, you also mentioned at the beginning, for adding the kind of revision to our title to include anti-capitalism in action as well as abolition, because, you know, in our conversation last night, we were talking a little bit about the sort of effect of abolitionism entering the mainstream the way that it is now. And I think one of the byproducts of that is it gets sort of extricated from anti-capitalist struggle. So making sure that we're talking about abolition always in the context of anti-capital just feels really important. And I'll let Inney ask any questions if he has any, but just thank you, Alex, also for being a very thoughtful moderator and for, you know, carrying the legacy of the George Jackson Brigade and the Attica brothers in your filmmaking and organizing work and as an educator. So we appreciate that also.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's such an honor to be able to learn from your experience. You know, I echo everything Emily said, and kind of going off of it, I do have a question about political education. You know, it's my understanding that the brigade arrived at a sort of synthesis of communist and anarchist ideologies, and I'm wondering how that came to be, and how the agreement came about, and how that was embodied and expressed in your armed struggle.
I'll give that a try. I started out as an anarchist, as most of us do, because it's very easy to be all you have to do to be an anarchist, say you are one, and poof, you are. The contradiction between the anarchists and the Marxists would not come to fruition until after the seizure of state power. And so that's something that can be put on a back burner. That's not an issue. We're both after the same thing, and that's the destruction of the bourgeois state and replace it with something more democratic, more just and fair. And we're in complete agreement up until that point. And it may be that we communists would come to see the anarchist approach, or it may be that they would come over to see our approach. It's not necessarily so that this contradiction is an antagonistic one. Wow.
Janine or Mark, do you want to add to that?
I just
Janine, you're muted too. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Mark.
As far as having a straight political theme throughout my struggle from in prison and outside of prison to this day, is that I'm concerned more with the oppression that I myself feel, and along with others, but it's not something that somebody else's feel a few states away or a few countries away. But what's happening here in this country, I'm at the bottom of the working class. Being an ex-prisoner, I carry that stigma the rest of my life. I'll always be marginalized. Even with this, people seeing Ed and I and Janine on here, will be marginalized when they hear the history that we've been in prison, trying to take away from our legitimacy. But in the past, we had to have the Little Red Book, and the main thing that came from the Little Red Book is that in a revolution, you focus on your own oppression that comes out of the people, that still exists within the people, but your own oppression is first rather than somebody else's.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry, Janine, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good with that. That was great.
Well, thank you all for the millionth time, and in so many different ways for doing this today, but in general for just the sort of lives you've lived and the kind of models you presented and shown us the way in a way as we move forward in these very uncertain times. I'm anxious
to see the end project. I'll tell you that.
Say that again. Sorry, Mark.
I'm anxious to see the end product of all of this, because I've never forgotten Attica. So
maybe that's the place to end it. Remember Attica.
Attica is all of us.
Beautiful.
And you did a great job, Alex.
Thanks. Cut it when Ed said Attica is all of us. We can leave the rest of this off.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Can we
That
actually?
was great.
Yeah, it was
Be miserable in your editing. That's all.
Thank you.
Can we bring
Thanks,
here?
everyone.